So I don't want to do an intro today because Kingdom Come Deliverance shouldn't require one. If we lived in a perfect world, then this would be the game everyone talks about. No man, woman, or child would ever feel hunger without quoting Henry of Skalitz 2 seconds later. And Father Godwin would go down in history as one of the greatest characters ever, standing shoulder to shoulder with the other titans of our generation. There is a reason that the people who like this game absolutely love it. And admittedly, there are some very specific reasons that the people who tear this game apart do so whenever they get the chance. I'm getting ahead of myself though. In 30 seconds, what is Kingdom Come Deliverance, just in case you don't know or need a refresh? Well, it's the story of this sword, except not really. That's just the kicking off point for your adventures as Henry, a very ordinary blacksmith boy who has lofty dreams of one day exploring the world as a knight in shining armor. He soon gets his chance too, as by the time you've started to realize that Henry is about as far from your typical chosen one protagonist as it's possible to be, his entire ordinary world is turned on its head when the only village he ever knew is razed to the ground by invading humans, his parents are cut down in front of him, and the last sword his father ever crafted is ripped away and stolen. It's at that point that Kingdom Come Deliverance begins, truly, and Henry is feeling quite hungry for revenge. Speaking of hunger, I do have a sponsor for this video, and they did have some guidelines for me, but I'm just gonna throw those out to say that you really should try Factor, which I'm telling you from my own experience is the meal delivery service. I don't take a lot of brand deals on this channel because I'm stubborn, but Factor sent a box of their meals just to try, and now I'm signed up myself personally. Are their meals fresh and never frozen? Yeah, they are. But what mattered more to me is that every meal I've had has somehow been healthy, incredibly convenient, and really good, which I'm telling you, that is a near impossible combination. Heating the meals up takes just a couple of minutes. You have around 30 options to choose from each week, many of which clock in around 500 calories, and your order is fully customizable. To get started, head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code NEON50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. You won't be locked in or committed for more past that, so I'm just personally recommending give that first box a try at least, and you won't be disappointed. Now, back to Henry and his need for revenge, which is gonna have to wait a while after the game sets you loose, because when you first start out, Henry doesn't know how to do anything. He has no skills, which for the most part in Kingdom Come Deliverance means you have no skills. And this is a game completely uninterested in holding your hand as it gently guides you to success.
Ugh, of course. It couldn't be something easy, could it?
Listen, if you've ever found yourself up late at night, unable to sleep, desperately wishing there was a game out there that would frequently make you gaslight yourself into thinking the you of the past was an incompetent moron, then I am telling you, it doesn't get better than Kingdom Come Deliverance. That might sound like a bad thing, but it isn't. It's the good kind of gaslighting, the kind that makes you question your own sanity in a fun way. Why am I saying that? Well, because what Kingdom Come does with exploration, combat, stealth, and almost every other mechanic is exactly what leads many players to uninstall this game and never touch it again. Yet it's also one of the major reasons that those who stick with it love it. Kingdom Come is a rare game from recent years that actually respects the player. You aren't going to be coddled or treated like a buffoon with a piece of rebar lodged in your brain, the type that needs to be led by the nose and told exactly how to solve every single problem. Instead, it is up to you to figure out how you're gonna survive as the formless lump Henry is. You need to take Henry and mold him into something, and it's not going to be easy.
Can you give me an example?
Well, why don't we start with the controversial, the combat, also known as the part of the game that leaves many, even some of those who were warned, feeling the same way.
I see it's every bit as bad as people claimed. Dreadful.
What is it that leads people to such despair? Is the combat truly as awful as the internet would have you believe? I mean, look almost anywhere and you'll see tons of people trashing it. Nearly every YouTube video you'll find will be sure to use the word clunky at least 700 times. And at launch, the combat was often cited as the main issue holding this game back.
I won't lie, sir. I don't understand it.
I'd say about 30% of that reputation comes from actual major issues, and the remaining 70 comes down to just how brutal and unforgiving it can be when you're first starting out. Kingdom Come isn't a game where your starting character is already super competent, but just has weak equipment that needs to be slowly upgraded. It's not that at all. In fact, having the best equipment is the part that really doesn't matter that much, and the game doesn't try to hide that. I mean, if you own the DLC, you'll start out with a bunch of treasure maps in your inventory that lead you directly to some of the game's best looking and strongest armor, and there is nothing stopping you from getting most of it immediately. If you want to drop the of Skalitz title and become Henry of Balenciaga in your first few hours, you can. But that won't help very much if you were thinking you could brute force your way into being decent at combat by just getting better equipment stats. Nope, Henry himself is the problem, and after the prologue you're given a grand total of 1 required combat tutorial, where you train with this guy, Captain Bernard, who isn't easily impressed.
Well, that was awful. I didn't imagine a village yokel like you would have much skill, but you failed to meet even my low expectations.
All Bernard is required to teach you are the very basics, like stabbing, blocking, how to fire an arrow at a stationary target, and then you're done. You would think, if you're at all conditioned by other games like I was, that what you're taught then is all you need to get by until the first few main quests ease you into being at least decent, or eventually lead you back to Bernard for more required training. That's not the case though. Henry still sucks, and that 20 minutes of training was just that, 20 minutes. Henry is as slow and stiff as he was before, and while you can hit the road right after and do whatever you want, you're in medieval Bohemia, baby. You're gonna die without further training. When you first pick up a weapon like a mace, Henry will swing that thing so slowly it's pathetic. I once did a full speedrun of Witcher 3's entire main quest in the time it took to get 1 solitary swing in. How do you improve that? Well, you go back to Bernard and you train with a mace. With Henry, you don't have to work a little to be good, you have to work a lot to be competent. This guy runs out of breath after a 4-second sprint. Without training, he can only swing heavy weapons like 3 times before he's exhausted. What exactly is he gonna do against a group of armed bandits?
Jesus, it's gonna be really painful, isn't it?
Overall, I loved the way this game approached combat, and I especially admired its ambition. Although it does have a few glaring issues that ultimately just make me excited for the sequel, assuming that happens, because they're problems that can be fixed and built upon. For example, the Master Strike, which is essentially an I win button in some situations, is a little too easy to unlock and far too easy to activate. Another example of an area that needs work, the combos. For all the time I spent working to learn these, well, they're very satisfying when you pull them off, but I'd like for them to be more useful against the enemies you'd actually want to use them on, because most of the time, you're better off and safer with a Master Strike and a bonk to the head. Also, it's been said before, but the development focus was clearly on 1v1s in KCD. That is where the combat really shines, and while it does hold up well against up to 3 or maybe 4 enemies, the larger that number gets, the more the flaws show themselves. By the way, for the actually crowd who are currently firing up their keyboards to tell me that if you tried to fight several enemies in real life, you'd die, that's not what I'm saying. I have no problem with the difficulty, I just found that once you get to the point where you are able to take on 5 or 6 enemies head first, that is when the combat started to get really one-dimensional. You just end up backpedaling while fighting the lock-on and waiting to Master Strike, while half your opponents got stuck on a bush or something, because that almost always happened. For that reason, I much preferred taking out the bigger bandit camps a little more tactically, some stealth, poison, that sort of thing. Other than those few issues though, Warhorse have a rock-solid foundation to build on, which is what I hope they've been doing for the past 5 years or so.
Now, that's no mean feat you're asking.
As well I know.
Now, I need to point out, Henry sucking is not limited to only the physical side of things. This guy can't read at first, and even talking is something of a challenge. In your first few hours, Henry is the black hole where charisma goes to die. Yet, as you have conversations with people and increase your stats for speech, he'll soon become a silver-tongued viper who will surprise you at times with just how clever or funny he can be.
You look like a clever sort of fellow, and chivalrous too. You wouldn't leave a damsel in distress, would you?
Why? Do you know of one somewhere?
Almost all of the secondary skills you learn in KCD progress naturally. What were total headaches at first becomes second nature, just like in real life, which makes that progression so satisfying. There are really only 2 of the non-combat related skills out of about a dozen where that sense of progression just didn't click for me, and those are the lockpicking and pickpocketing minigames. Pickpocketing I just found outright annoying for the first 7 or so levels, because it's very RNG based at first. You will insta-fail and get caught through no fault of your own, and that's only an issue because failing pickpocketing often means you'll either end up in jail or pay a huge fine, so I would just end up saving before ever attempting it, and against the same exact person, it would auto-fail once or twice or 3 times, and then I'd finally get to try the minigame, and that was with me using potions to boost my stats. Lockpicking, on the other hand, is a really weird one, because 50% of people are probably expecting me to go one way, and the other 50% are expecting me to go the other.
What's that? What are you blubbering on about?
What I mean is that lockpicking with keyboard and mouse is so easy from the start that other than the game preventing you from even trying certain locks at first, there's not much of a feeling that you're slowly getting better and progressing, which I realize isn't the case with a controller at all from what I've heard. Keyboard and mouse though, all you have to do is find your entry point and move your cursor a little bit. It takes no effort, and in all of my playthroughs I never broke a single lockpick, which meant most of the lockpicking perks you could equip were useless, which I suppose gives me an opening to mention the perk system. As you level up various skills, you'll occasionally, every few levels, be given a point to spend on a bonus perk related to that skill. Only a small handful, maybe 15 of the 100 plus are game changers, but the rest, they're almost always either a small, usually situational stat boost, which is fine, or, and these are the ones I kinda have a problem with, they're completely useless, with at least 20 or so reaching the point where you just shouldn't take them because they have more of a negative effect than a positive. Yeah, the perk system is pretty thin, and the vast majority of players would not notice if Warhorse snuck in a stealth update tomorrow that secretly bugged out the effects of 80% of them.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Speaking of bugs, Kingdom Come Deliverance is unfortunately a game that has the reputation of being a bug-filled mess. People love the word jank when it comes to KCD. It's not a review of this game if that word isn't used every 14 seconds.
Oh, don't exaggerate.
I'm just here to say that this game simply does not deserve the messy reputation it has anymore. I can't speak for the state of it at launch, I'm sure there were tons of issues that needed ironing out, but half a decade later, KCD has very few true bugs. What it does have for a brand new player, including me when I started out, is a very blurred line between what is just how the game works, for better or worse, and what is occasionally something that unintentionally went wrong. In your first few hours, it might seem like something is off when a quest isn't telling you exactly what to do. You may think a marker that isn't on your map should be, but as you'll find out, that's the beauty of quest design in KCD. 99% of the time, if you think about the situation as if it were a real problem you needed to solve, a solution will present itself to you. I say a solution because there are very few cases where it's the solution. You can almost always go about things in any way you want to as long as it makes sense. It's also worth pointing out that some of the little quirks and new studio limitations this game has may seem like bugs until you get used to them. Like NPCs will almost always tell you, goodbye, even if you're about to go do some activity with them. And in certain villages there will often be 10, 20 NPCs that all have the same exact dialogue. I'm not saying those things are good, in fact the repeated NPC dialogue was something I never really grew to like, but they aren't bugs even if it may feel that way early on. All I really ever experienced in my playthroughs were weird camera angles every once in a while, or maybe an NPC feeling a little silly and goofy from time to time.
Welcome, Henry.
By this point, I've talked at length about the gameplay. What about the story? Well, it may feel like the next few words I say contradict themselves, but KCD manages to be an origin story that doesn't feel generic and overdone. It's not this neat little package of Henry's first baby-scale adventure, one that ties itself up nicely by the end. Instead, we're just seeing the true first chapter of this guy's adult life, and there is nothing tidy about it. I'm gonna talk some general spoilers past the opening here. I'll be back to being vaguely spoiler-free during the DLC section except for the final one, but the main thrust of the base game story is nowhere near resolved by the end. Henry's father's sword is stolen at the very beginning, Henry wants revenge and to retrieve it, and that's still true when the credits roll. What is there for the story is very smart in that it leans heavily on its best qualities, the characters and the voice acting that's fantastic where it matters. I say where it matters because, well, admittedly there are some really goofy performances with minor NPCs and you'll also hear some repeated voices, but the main cast, Henry included, are all fantastic and make even the most straightforward main quest entertaining. I would argue the story's greatest overall strength are all the curveballs the character relationships throw at you. One thing KCD does so well is take relationships in really unexpected directions with flawless execution. Sir Hans is this pompous, spoiled little brat that the game sets up as a character to hate, yet just a couple of hours later you find yourself witnessing the start of a friendship that couldn't possibly feel more natural.
You want me to go flower picking now?
I know, I'm putting you to work again, but if you do it, I'll give you 70 Flowengroschen.
That much?
All right.
I'll go.
On the topic of characters going in unexpected directions, one of those situations is the major twist of the story, that being that Henry's father didn't really die. Well, the man who raised Henry did, but his biological dad is still alive and well. It turns out that Sir Radzig, the Lord of Skalitz where Henry grew up, and the man who took Henry into his service following the raid, is his real father. Now, I replayed the prologue before making this video, and my main takeaway from doing so was that I'm now wondering if I hit my head really, really hard the first day I ever played this game, because there are so many clues that Radzig is Henry's dad. I mean, the prologue beats you over the head with little hints, a beating that in my case apparently led to some minor brain damage, because I don't know how I didn't see it coming, but I failed to, and I just wanted to make that confession.
You did hit your head hard, didn't you?
Yes? Why?
Overall, the main story of KCD, if you step back and try to look at it as a cohesive journey, well, in that sense, it's just solid. You'd never think that while playing though, because the individual smaller scale storylines and the characters you meet along the way are what reach the level of greatness. Most of the main quests are telling their own little standalone story, and the bigger picture of Henry, Radzig, the invading humans, and the stolen sword is often used as just connective tissue linking everything together, and that decision never bothered me once. There are long stretches where the main quest will directly splinter off into what is technically a side quest, although that line gets really blurred, at which point you'll end up focusing on almost entirely unrelated tasks, and those are usually the standouts. For example, curing the village of Merhoyed of a horrific plague. The reason you end up in that village is because someone you need to question for the main story is being held there, but just showing up seamlessly takes off into this mostly standalone situation, one that requires an entirely separate investigation that you get sucked into for well over an hour.
The trouble lies between the mouth and the arsehole.
Uh-huh. Sure. Just so.
One major strength of KCD is that even the most straightforward tasks are always being elevated by this authentic world Warhorse has created. The villages, the castles, I mean even the woods are somehow a character of their own. The f***ing woods. And it's not like there's much going on in them, they just feel real, and I'd often lose 20, 30 minutes just wandering around, picking herbs and hunting. The soundtrack is also incredible, and while usually that's something you'd say about a game you don't really have that many nice things to weigh in about, you know, just to soften the blow, in this case the music is so good that I have to mention it, even in a review of what is now one of my favorite games of all time. I want the soundtrack vinyl so bad, but it's ridiculously expensive, so I'll never own it, but it would fit in so nicely next to my King Diamond collection. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about, and it's weird to say one of the last things because I'm only about halfway through the video, but I need to bring up the 4 proper paid DLCs, which are often completely ignored or just brushed aside with an offhand comment. Is that for good reason? Well, I don't know about that, but I do understand why the base game gets way more attention and praise than what came later.
That's pretty harsh.
Now, that's not to say that the DLCs are bad, far from it, but they vary pretty wildly in quality, and it does feel like 70% of the resources went into one of them, to the point where 2 of the 4 just seem like medium-sized bonus quests, the type that you might get in a free update. Now, to be fair, that's pretty much what they are these days. You're unlikely to be buying these standalone anymore, because if you're getting KCD, you should be picking up the Royal Edition that includes these for no extra cost. Still, I want to issue something of a warning here, because while the base game has become very, very special to me, it's the type of game I want more of and will do everything I can to support, I surprisingly found the DLC content to be kind of a mixed bag. And that was with me going in having zero expectations. I didn't even know the premise of most of them until I started. The first DLC is From the Ashes, and in this one you rebuild the village of Privoslavets, which before Henry's time had been torched, abandoned, and then eventually taken by humans and other bandits before being cleared out during the base game. The village needs a from-the-ground-up restoration, and even if you haven't played this game, you probably already know exactly what this DLC is. It's just a way to spend all of the meaningless money you have no other use for. Henry is appointed bailiff of this soon-to-be rebuilt settlement because it's a DLC, why not? And if you already have the groschen, this game's currency, then from that point forward, most of From the Ashes is just watching the same cutscene or a slight variation of it over and over again. Rebuilding the town is almost entirely hands-off. You go up to a book, select what you want to build, then slow walk an NPC to where it goes before watching a very short cutscene of the construction. If you have the money up front to build the entire town, which I did, then you'll end up repeating that process like 25 times in the space of maybe an hour and a half, and that's all you'll be doing. There's also very little customization outside of a few limitations, like you can either have a butcher or a baker, you can't have both even if you have tons of extra money, and you also don't have a say in where buildings go, that's all set in stone. From the Ashes to me was an exciting concept with really bare bones execution. I mean, you can't talk to the vast majority of the villagers, you don't get your own proper house to customize, most of the useful building types you'd actually want in your village aren't even available, like a tailor or a bathhouse, and while there is a passive money-making element once built up properly, there's nothing to it, and money is completely useless anyway if you do this DLC after completing the base game, unless you just didn't do any side quests or were somehow blowing your money on things that didn't matter. Really, the best of From the Ashes other than the setup were the super optional parts that you aren't even given objectives for, like the little bailiff judgments or when you're able to ask certain NPCs from the main story to move to your village. I especially liked that, not because there's much to those conversations, there really isn't, but you're able to give some purpose to some of the Scarlet survivors, including Henry's friends who are down on their luck the entire game. That was really nice, although I did find it weird that you're not able to tell Henry's girlfriend Teresa about Privoslavitz at all. Like, there's reasons she might not go, but there are other way more obscure NPCs that you can tell that also don't go, so not even being able to mention that you're now the bailiff of an entire town was pretty awkward.
Henry, you donkey.
I really think From the Ashes would be a better experience if started fairly early in a playthrough, like the second it becomes available when money might still be tight. Then it could just be a background activity while you do other things to build up your wealth, and you'd have the mild satisfaction of slowly building up a town as opposed to just 90 minutes of the same repeated cutscene. Even at its best though, From the Ashes, in my opinion, just doesn't live up to the potential of its concept. Now, the second DLC happens to be my second favorite of the four, that being The Amorous Adventures of Sir Hans Capon. Now, because of the brain damage I suffered during the prologue, I actually did this entire DLC not fully realizing it wasn't part of the base game. It's just a very short extension of Henry's friendship with Hans and the little misadventures they get up to. Hans has a crush on the butcher's daughter, he wants Henry to help him woo her, and this goes in a few very unexpected directions. You end up helping a charlatan haunt an entire village, and you also find yourself infiltrating a camp to solve a murder mystery, which I took care of in a somewhat unconventional way.
Don't you start. Oh well. I wouldn't mind a bite to eat, actually.
One thing that does hold this DLC back a bit is, well, considering Hans Capon is in the name, he isn't really in it that much, and that's putting it mildly. For the most part, you're just being his solo errand boy, which ends up being fun because of the way the quests are written, but what you're doing only ties back to Hans in a very loose way. The haunting especially felt like Warhorse had part of a quest that wasn't finished in time for the base game, so they repurposed it into this DLC. You get like a 30-second interaction with Hans before you end up doing this extensive 90-minute haunting that has almost nothing to do with what he asked of you in the first place, other than the reward at the end of it being something he wanted you to get. I just wish they'd included Hans more in a DLC that was supposed to be about him. An extra quest or two would have gone a long way. The first 3 DLCs all have this consistent theme of not hitting the full potential of their concept, and I say first 3 because that also applies to the next one, Band of Bastards, where Henry is sent by his father, Radzig, to keep an eye on a group of mercenaries who are temporarily working for him. It's another amazing concept, Henry joining a group of rogues and heading out on patrol, and it starts off so strong. The first 90 minutes or so are great, the very beginnings of getting to know this cast of mercenaries couldn't have been better, and patrolling the countryside and telling stories of your past adventures was excellent. Once that first bit was over though, things started to get messy and rushed. It felt like the story was just given up on, and right around the time the DLC felt like it was maybe getting close to being half over at most, it just ended within 20 minutes instead. This one needed more time in the oven, a lot more. It introduces a massive group of really interesting characters, but you barely get time to know any of them before the experience is over. And when you finally report back to Radzig, he's just like, whatever, it didn't matter all that much anyway, which honestly is about how I felt by that point. Thankfully, you get an amazing armor set when all is said and done, which kinda saved the ending for me a bit. Ultimately, I'm just curious, and would be surprised if the original vision was what we ended up getting. Because if you look at the amount of polish and the apparent resources that went into this DLC compared to the next one, well, it doesn't even feel like a fair comparison.
But we must not despair. Even those who have strayed from the right path
may be redeemed.
The final DLC, A Woman's Lot, is massive compared to the others. You could split it in half and you'd still have significantly more content than either of the previous two. It also happens to be the most controversial DLC. Whereas the first three just aren't talked about all that much because the base game is the star of the show, A Woman's Lot is very polarizing. People seem to either think it's some of the best content in the game, or they absolutely have it out for A Woman's Lot and hate it. Dare to go somewhere like Reddit and you'll find people claiming it was the worst experience they've ever had in a video game.
It was terrible, like hell itself.
A Woman's Lot consists of two completely separate storylines. In the first, you're helping a character named Johanka, and in the second, you play not as Henry, but as his girlfriend Teresa in an alternate and extended POV of the raid on Skalitz. I'll just say up front that A Woman's Lot was my favorite of the 4 DLCs. It wasn't even close for me, and I'd go as far as to say that if it only included one particular half, it would still be my favorite. The level of polish and attention to detail found in this DLC was part of what was lacking from the others. Of the 4, A Woman's Lot is the only one that feels like the devs had the time and resources to see their vision through. And to be fair, if you're not interested in the concept of the DLC, then it isn't going to be your favorite no matter what, and that's fine. But it does live up to its premise, and there's no feeling of there being missing features or a storyline that was cut really short. No, it seems like they had the time to bring to life exactly what they wanted to with this final DLC, and for my money, they did an amazing job. It's funny because if you had told me the basic concept of these 4 DLCs before I played them, this one absolutely would not have been at the top. I mean, I would have had some interest, but top of the list? No.
Yes. I am a sinner.
I should also mention that this DLC gives Henry a dog named Mutt, who you can train and take out on adventures. It's a real grind at first because until you level up quite a lot, there's only a few very repetitive options for gaining dog XP, but Mutt does become ridiculously useful at a certain point, especially once he'll hunt for you and even attack enemies at your command, which is pretty, sick.
Look what I've got for you. You'll love this.
As for the 2 main storylines, the one where you still play as Henry involves defending a childhood acquaintance from the grievous charge of heresy. Johanka, a survivor of the raid on Skalitz, starts making the claim that the Virgin Mary is speaking to her, and she needs Henry's help with various tasks. It starts out not quite as serious as it eventually gets, as in the beginning Johanka just says she's having visions in the night, and doesn't know why she's having them or where they're coming from, so there's no risk of heresy yet. However, the one issue I do take with the Johanka side of this DLC is that I felt the required involvement of Henry if you want to get to the main part of this quest went a little too far. There came a point in the middle of this first phase when Johanka is asking Henry to do pretty ridiculous things, where I was only going along with it because what I thought was the logical next step for Henry wasn't an option. Johanka starts getting really loud about how the Virgin Mary is speaking through her and sending messages, to the point where she's giving speeches in the town square and eventually holding secret meetings outside of the village that you have to attend if you want to continue with the quest. And that secret meeting results in Henry beating off, or actually let's go with fighting, a bunch of villagers who very predictably don't like what Johanka has been shouting from the rooftops. For me, there were multiple points where I felt like everything about where the quest was headed was screaming for an option where Henry would say, "Johanka, shut up and listen to me. Real or not, you need to keep these visions from Mary to yourself, or you are going to end up in serious trouble if you're lucky, or dead if the wrong villager gets a little too annoyed with what you've been saying. I can't help you anymore, or I'll be in the same boat." Unfortunately, that's not really something you can do. I mean, there are plenty of moments where Henry can tell Johanka that what she's doing is going to end horribly, because that's obvious, but then you still have to go through with everything unless you intend to just quit the DLC. If you want to do the very best part of this quest, which begins when an Inquisitor very predictably arrives to put Johanka on trial, then you have to do all of the increasingly dangerous tasks Johanka sets for you. And I say dangerous because, well, it reaches a point where Henry gets so involved that if he weren't a protagonist in a video game, then he would be in huge trouble too. Fingers would be pointing his way as well as Johanka's, and he absolutely wouldn't be the one tasked with defending her at trial, which is what ends up happening. The rest of this quest, after the Inquisitor arrives, has Johanka locked up, and Henry needing to gather positive community testimony and other evidence of Johanka's good deeds so he can prove she's a good Christian and not a heretic, because that's what an Inquisitor cares about. During this, Henry also needs to convince Johanka to say the right things when on trial, which in this case just means taking everything back. Now, I want to be clear, I do think the creative liberty of having Henry be involved with the trial and not in trouble himself is a good thing. The devs have said outright that that was a deliberate choice made by them because it's a game. That's fine, because it makes for an amazing experience. The building of a defense for Johanka takes hours of careful prep work. I mean, by itself, it's nearly as long as the entirety of the previous DLC, and I loved it. That said, I do think the awkward middle section of this quest, where going along with Johanka's visions is required to an extreme, could have been solved pretty easily. One thing KCD does from time to time is have quests go on the back burner, where you don't have a specific objective and can't progress them for the moment because you need to move a different connected quest forward a bit, or time just needs to pass in-game. A good example would be the romance quest for Henry's girlfriend Teresa. After you take her out on a date, your quest log will update just vaguely saying that you should check in on her sometime in the future. Eventually that will update to tell you to go see her now or as soon as you can, at which point you can take her on another date. If you go back too soon though, you'll just get turned away.
I've got lots to do right now, but I'd love to go another time.
I think a situation like that would have worked really well as an option to smooth out that awkwardness in the middle of this quest line. Whenever the player felt like Johanka's requests went too far, they could back out and plead for her to stop for her own sake, which she of course wouldn't listen to, as the trial part of this quest proves, which means the Inquisitor would eventually arrive anyway. Whenever the player backed out could be the point where the quest takes a pause with no specific objective, and after, say, a week of in-game time, it could update with a new objective for Henry, something like, I should go see how Johanka is doing. And when you do that, you'd learn of the Inquisitor's arrival, and boom, now you're the one building up a defense for her with the same exact justification the quest already gives you. That's just my take on it, and even with the awkward middle part, this quest, the Madonna of Sasau is what it's called, was one of my 10 favorites overall, almost entirely because of what comes after the Inquisitor shows up. What I really loved about this questline was that the final boss wasn't the Inquisitor, it was Johanka herself. Building up a defense for her is not easy by any means, but it is the easy part compared to convincing Johanka to not get herself killed. You can build the greatest case of all time for why she's a good person, and she is in a lot of ways, but if she won't listen to reason and say the right things, it won't matter. Ultimately, she doesn't care what Henry has to say, no matter what you do, and the only way to get through to her is to speak to another Scarlet survivor, Matthias, who Johanka loves and had been looking after because Matthias was injured in the raid. By speaking with him and then appealing to his need for her, Johanka does finally come around.
I ask you to welcome Johanka back into your midst and hold no grudge against her.
I also really appreciated that this DLC doesn't make the Inquisitor out to be some cartoonishly evil guy who just can't wait to kill his 7th heretic of the week. No, in his mind, it's his duty to show up and give a fair trial. He's true to himself and his religion in that he believes the best outcome to be one where Johanka isn't a heretic and no one has to be punished. But if she turns out to have a little heretical streak in her, well, what has to be done in his mind. Now, I don't think I need to say this, but I will anyway for the Fritzes out there. I am absolutely not saying the Inquisitor is right, only that this character is handled with subtlety.
Exactly.
Now, as mentioned, the other half of this DLC has you playing as Henry's girlfriend Teresa during the raid on Skalitz. And this is the half that's extremely controversial. It's most of the reason A Woman's Lot is sitting at a 6 out of 10 on Steam. Now, part of that I understand, because some of the reception comes from people accidentally starting this quest and getting stuck in it. Beginning this part of the DLC is done by simply asking Teresa how she escaped Skalitz, and you may not realize that the icon next to the dialogue option means you're about to trigger a 4-hour quest line where you don't play as Henry or make any progress towards leveling him up. You also can't back out unless you just load a previous save, which might mean losing hours of progress, so I can totally see the frustration there. In my case though, this was the very last thing I did in my first playthrough, and in that context, I loved every minute of Teresa's story. And the best part of her questline is how absolutely off the f***ing rails it gets by the end. By the way, and reflecting back now, I probably should have led with this, but I've completed KCD 3 times now. My first playthrough started in 2019, over 2 years before this channel even existed, and that one by itself took me over a year. I took things extremely slow, no fast travel unless I died and lost progress, and by the time I'd finished everything, I just wanted to start all over again, which I did. Then, flash forward to last year, and I felt myself wanting to play a third time, and lucky for me, I had the convenient excuse of, oh, I have this YouTube channel now, I should do a video on it after a refresh playthrough, which is what happened. As to whether I'll ever do a fourth hardcore run, which if you don't know is the alternate mode of KCD where you don't really have a map, and you also have to take negative traits to make the game harder, well, we'll see. If this video does well and grows the channel, I may do a follow-up at some point after a hardcore run where I take all of the negative traits, because if I'm gonna do a hardcore playthrough, I'd want to go all in. Let me know if that's something you'd want to see, but I'm making no promises. I am way too stubborn to look things up, which means no map might just be the end of me. Anyway, the beginning 2 hours playing as Teresa are a very slow burn, where you're seeing Henry's pre-raid hometown way more than you ever do during the base game. During this, you get to experience how a miller's daughter in medieval times would live, with a few embellishments. You do some chores, a little thievery, help cover up a bit of fraud. All you medieval ladies watching, you know how it is. As this all happens though, you're seeing characters that you've only known as homeless, down on their luck beggars instead live their happy little lives before the most violent night imaginable takes place. It holds a lot of weight if you've been side questing as Henry and seeing just how horrible a turn their lives would soon take. This questline with Teresa also felt to me like a showcase of something major Warhorse can improve with the sequel, which might sound unhinged at first. I don't want Henry replaced with Teresa, but conversations and dialogue are way more polished in this alternate prologue than anywhere else, including the other DLCs. I mean, you can have lengthy, unique conversations with just about everyone. There's no generic repetition to be found. And one weakness I felt the main game had was the absence of follow-up conversations. Frequently, as Henry, I'd finish a quest or task, and I'd then want to go back to certain relevant characters to tell them what happened or to hear their thoughts. Unfortunately, more often than not, I'd be a little disappointed when you couldn't. Teresa's storyline takes that to the extreme, but in the opposite direction. Anytime you think it might make sense to go back to a character and speak with them again, do it, because there's a conversation waiting there to reward you. That leap forward is one of the top improvements I hope to see consistently in whatever Warhorse's next game is. Now, as for this DLC going off the rails, well, once the Cumans show up, Teresa's entire family other than her dog and one brother are taken out instantly. And I expected a woman's lot to make Teresa extremely weak. I figured the second the raid started, the rest of the quest line would be strictly stealth, the kind that goes on painfully long to the point of extreme boredom. And if you were even seen by a Cuman at all, you'd just die unless you managed to run away. For whatever reason though, and I was fully on board, you can spend the next 2 hours as an axe-wielding maniac woman leaping from the darkness as you kill fully armored Cuman after fully armored Cuman. Is this in line with the realism the rest of the game at least attempts? No, it definitely isn't, but I was enjoying myself way too much to care. Anyway, as the night progresses, Teresa slowly loses everything and everyone, and the quest ends when you catch up to a moment from the base game when Henry's sword is stolen, he's about to be killed, but Teresa helps save the day with a distraction. You know, as a bonus experience after my playthrough as Henry was 100% over, I loved this, and replaying Henry's prologue directly after was a really cool experience I'd highly recommend, which honestly could be my one-line review of the entire game. For the first time maybe ever on this channel, I'm just gonna let my own personal biases fully take over to say that I think Kingdom Come Deliverance is one of the best games of all time. Does it have some issues? Yeah, if you haven't noticed, I've been pointing them out here and there for the last 40 minutes, or however long this video ends up being, but for the most part, those are growing pains from a game that is bursting at the seams with passion and ambition, and it's where Warhorse can improve and take feedback. This is their first and currently only release, and to hit you with a major understatement, I'd say they did a pretty good job. Anyway, that's all for today, thank you for watching, and if you're interested in me covering whatever Warhorse's next game ends up being, consider subscribing and leaving a like if you enjoyed. Oh, also, this is the first proper video I've posted since the channel hit 100k, and it's my 40th upload overall, so thanks for that and all the progress, and thank you as always to my patrons for their support. Alright, that's it, see you later.